My name is Matt, and I have met some of you before, and others I am seeing for the first time. I have not seen Bashir for a long time.
2 years?
A couple at least. And when I first saw him tonight, I thought, boy, that guy looks familiar. And then, but I couldn't place a name to the face. And then when Alper mentioned your name, it's like, oh, duh, that's Bashir. And I remembered from Toastmasters round one a couple years ago. So my name is Matt, and I just on Saturday finished walking across Turkey. I was on the road for 7 months, and some people from the club here came out to join me on the final day of the walk. And so that I know where you are, please raise your hand if you came out on the final day of the walk. So Tolga, Alper, Yonca, anybody else? Okay. So Alper, Tolga, and Yonca came out to join me on the final day of the walk. And that was Saturday. And then I got back to Istanbul on Monday night. So I've just been back for less than 2 days. And I don't really know where to begin. So I've been on the road for 7 months, so I have a bunch of stories. And I asked Alper, what should I speak about tonight? And Alper said, well, tell some stories from the last day of the walk, from Saturday. I haven't really processed those yet, and so I don't really know how to tell those stories. So I'm just going to tell 3 favorite stories of mine from the walk. Some of them date back to September, so I've had a while to think about them. And then if we have any time left over, then I'll just open it up for questions. I've been on the, like I say, been on the road for 7 months. I started the walk on the 1st of September. And the total was 2,101 kilometers. One of my favorite stories from the walk, I think of it as the guns at the wedding story. And this was in Denizli, way back in September. And I had been walking for about 2 weeks, and I had already had a few hiccups in the trip, some injuries and stuff, but I was over it by then. And so I arrived in Denizli, and I was walking through Denizli, and for a couple weeks, I had been out on the road, walking through the fresh air, walking through small villages and unpopulated areas. And so I was really grooving on the fresh air, and then I came to Denizli, which is all of, about 500,000 people, but at that point it was the most massive town that I had been in for, over a month. And so I was walking through, and there were all these trucks, and the air was bad, and there was all this exhaust, and I was in a really bad mood. And these guys, as I was walking out of town, came running out from a gasoline station, which people often do when I'm out walking. And so they invited me back in to have a seat at the gasoline station and drink some tea and have a little chat. So I did that. And that had become a pretty routine thing for me. Sit at a gasoline station, have some tea, chat with the gasoline station attendants. That was a pretty standard procedure for me. And these guys invited me to a wedding. This was on a Friday afternoon that I was walking through. And the wedding was the next day, on Saturday. And they gave me an invitation. And I didn't think much of it. I just crumbled up the invitation and stuffed it in my pocket. And because I was in a bad mood. This is like the last thing I wanted to do was go be social and go to a wedding and stuff. So I continued walking out at Denizli after we finished up our tea. And then I stopped in at another gasoline station. And I sat down at the gasoline station. It was really nice. And this was back in September. So the weather was still pretty nice and warm. The days were long. And the air conditioner was on, and the TV, there was some basketball game or something. So I sat down, and I was watching the TV and enjoying the air conditioning. And these 3 young women walked in, and they started, chatting me up and charming me and stuff. And so my mood changed very dramatically. And so when the opportunity came up again to go to this wedding, I was much more receptive to the idea. And it turned out that one of the gasoline station attendants was at this gasoline station was also going to that same exact wedding. He was from that same village. He knew the guy who was getting married. And so, and he invited me to come stay with his parents at their house in the village. So I did. And we went to the wedding. And it was the first wedding that I'd ever been to that had guns. And oh, there were so many guns. At first, I felt very safe because, you know, early on in the evening, 90% of the people out on the floor were women, and none of them had guns. You know, they were out there dancing and stuff. But then, as the night wore on, the women started to go home or something, and pretty soon it was all men. And that's when the guns came out. And so they didn't have any problem shooting their guns while they were dancing on a packed dance floor, completely drunk off of their rockers. And so to have a bunch of guys dancing around, pulling guns out of their waistband and shooting them up in the air, usually, sometimes at angles that were a little bit more questionable, I felt like I was going to die that day. I was sitting there, and I was kind of sitting on the edge of the dance floor. I wasn't real eager to go out there and dance with a bunch of drunk guys shooting guns. And so I was sitting on the edge, and I figured that if any stray bullets take anybody out, the bullets are going to kill somebody before they get to me. So that's why I was on the edge of the dance floor. Still, though, I could feel, all night long, I could feel a bullet just coming and just ripping out my throat. And I would die there in Denizli that night, sprawled out, spraying blood everywhere at a wedding. Fortunately, that did not happen. The wedding wound down, and then a bunch of us went to a bakkal, and we bought some beers, and we did the age-old small-town tradition, which is to buy a bunch of beers and load into a pickup truck and drive up into the hills and drink ourselves silly at 3 o'clock in the morning. So that's one of my favorite events from the walk, is the guns at the wedding. And another came at the end of November. At that point, the end of November, the first few days of December, I was, where was that? I was nearing the Mediterranean coast. So I had walked southeast from Konya to the city of Karaman. Is anybody familiar with that town? Raise your hand if you're familiar with that town. Okay. Karaman? Yeah. Not Kahraman Marash, but Karaman, yeah. Okay. So, and then between there and Silifke, there's a river, the Göksu River. Is that what it's called? Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, I was walking along the Göksu River, and one night I was just camping on the side of the road, and out in the behind some trees or something. And there was a huge storm, like just this lightning and this thunder just crack and roll, and it sounded like it was just going to shatter the trees that were above me. And I was sure that sometime during the night, one of these trees was just going to explode and just come raining down on my tent. It didn't, and I woke up the next morning, and the sky was clear and the storm had broken, and the clouds were starting to move away. So I got up and I started walking. And after a couple kilometers of walking, so it was still pretty early in the morning, maybe it was 8:30 in the morning, I came upon this gendarme komutanla, right? This military installation out in the middle of nowhere. And from before the walk, people have been telling me that I should keep the gendarme posted about my whereabouts so that they knew that I was in the area. And I hadn't done this up to this point, and it had never been a problem for me. But I figured, hey, there's a first time for everything. So I'm walking along, and there's this rain coming down, and I'm kind of hungry because I haven't had any breakfast, and all I had eaten the day before was, some cookies and cakes from a gasoline station, so I was kind of hungry. And I knew that they had food, in the gendarme station. So I figured this is a great time to crash. İyi akşamlar, welcome. So I figured this was a great time to crash my first gendarme station. So I see the gendarme station and I walk up to it. And I go up to the gate, and you know how the gendarme stations are. There's all this barbed wire and all these fences and the red signs that say don't, take photos and don't come near us, this is bad. So I walk up there and, there's this little pimply-faced 20-year-old kid, with this big gun that's about as big as a car. And he's standing out there with this big machine gun behind this big steel fence, and I walk up and I say, hey, how's it going? And if you're a pimply-faced 20-year-old kid stationed on guard duty out in the middle of nowhere, and all of a sudden some foreigner walks up with a backpack out of nowhere, unannounced, it's going to be an unusual event. So most of us were trying to maintain our composure. I'm staring at this kid with this gun that's as big as a car, and I didn't realize that machine guns were that large. And he was staring at me, trying to maintain his composure. I'm a big military man with a big gun, and I need to look cool. But actually, this is kind of weird because there's this foreigner coming out of nowhere and talking to me. So he radios up, up the chain of command. And eventually they talk to the station commander. And he says, oh yeah, let the guy in. So I go in, and by that time, they had kind of let their, no pun intended, they had let their guard down, they had kind of relaxed. And so they guided me into the station, and I went into the commander's office, and I sat down with the commander, and he was just reading reports and, tapping away at his computer and stuff. And so I sat down with him, and it was great because he ordered me up some food. And, at the gendarme station, they've got the kitchen, and I'm talking to the commander. I'm sitting there talking to the commander, and he has command of everybody in the station. So he says, oh yeah, you cook up this guy some food, make him some menemen. So they brought me this plate of menemen that was about this big, and this big basket of bread that was about this high. And then they brought me like a glass of tea that was about this large. And I hadn't eaten real food in over 24 hours. So I just thought this was great. So it took me all of about 3 minutes though to eat all of that food. I was trying my best, not to look like a complete animal. But once that food was in front of me, I couldn't help myself. And so I started just plowing into that food. And it was the best menemen that I've ever tasted. At least at the moment, I thought so. And then I looked at some computer pictures. The guy had some pictures of Mardin on his computer. He had been stationed in Mardin for a while, so he showed me some pictures of Mardin. And then he noticed me staring at a map on the wall, and I was really fascinated with this map because it showed, in great detail where I would be walking that day. And so he asked me, where are you going today? So I pointed out on the map the route that I would be walking. And he knew a guy at the village that I would be ending up at that day. And so he said, when you get to this village, look for a guy named Hoja. And so I walked, and I walk about, when I was walking about 6 hours a day. So I walked about 6 hours, and sometimes it rained because the storm blew back in. Sometimes it rained, and sometimes it was sunny, and the scenery was beautiful because it was a, river valley and stuff. But I got to this village, and I start looking for this guy named Hoja. And I'm walking around town saying, hey, where's Hoja? Where's Hoja? Because I didn't know the guy's real name. He doesn't really have a real name. He's just Hoja. So I started, asking, where's Hoja?
sure enough, there was a restaurant called Hoja's Place, Hoja and Mary. So I go over to this restaurant. I figure there's probably a guy named Hoja in here. And I sat down, and there was a guy named Hoja, and I mentioned the military commander, and they knew each other, and they were good friends. And I had this great recommendation from a military commander. And by the way, if you're ever out in the middle of nowhere in Turkey, the military commanders are a great resource. I highly recommend that you get to know one of the military commanders and the police. They helped me flag down cars so many times whenever I was hitchhiking and I couldn't find a ride. Anyway, military commanders and police. So anyway, I go into this restaurant and I sit down and I introduce myself. And within 20 seconds, somebody brings this huge plate of food. There's like a sujuk sandwich or something like that. And so, and then in the evening, somebody from the village invited me to come to their house and stay at their house. And and the night before, I'd been sleeping outside on the side of the road, getting rained on and stuff. And now all of a sudden, I'm in this nice, cozy house, and we're watching TV. I think it was, what's it called? Evelyn Benimle or something like that. Esra Errol. So we were watching that on television. And then some kids came over, to play with me. So I got down on all fours. We played horsey, and I was amazed that after weeks of walking and carrying this big pack, my pack weighed. Now it's past tense. My pack weighed about 20 kilos. And so I was amazed that, after all this walking around, that I could get down on the floor and play horsey with these kids. But somehow I found the energy. So military commander is a great resource because they'll set you up with a guy who makes great sujuk sandwiches, and then you get to watch some television and play horsey with some kids. And then the third story, is a story from Saturday. And it's about the Dutch woman who was riding her bike to Iran. So we're in Vaughan, and we're getting ready for the last day of the walk. So this was just Saturday, just a couple days ago. And we're gathering in front of this bus station in the corner of Vaughan, and I needed to go buy some glass bottles to break on the road. Because, I told some people back home that I was going to, write their names on the labels on these bottles and break, kind of like you do for a boat, when you christen a boat. I was going to break the bottles on the side of the road. So I needed to go buy some champagne or whatever. I ended up buying some little bottles of like apple cider, whatever was glass. So anyway, I go into the store, and there's this woman in there buying, kuru yemiş. She's buying, some bags of nuts or something, and she didn't speak any Turkish, and so she was trying to tell the guy, to put more in the bag, and so I volunteered for that, and then I left, and then a few minutes later, I saw these guys talking to her on the corner. She was back on the corner, and she had a bike, and so I go over there, and a bike is in a bicycle, so I go over there, and I start, I muscle in on the conversation, and there's this woman, is a Dutch woman. She's 55 years old, and she has ridden her bike from Istanbul across Turkey alone, and she's going to go ride in Iran. So she was at the bus station because she was going to ride the bus to the border with Iran, and she was going to ride her bike into Iran. And then after riding in Iran, she was going to come back to ride through the Black Sea region. So I say, well, don't bother riding that other bus. Come with us. We've got room. So we find a way to put her bike in our van and her bags and stuff. And then she goes out and she rides with us. And she decided to walk the last 5 kilometers. And after we walked and we spent a few minutes at the border, taking photos and stuff, at the end of my trip, then, she loaded up her bike and was getting ready to right across the border. And this was one of the most, or there were many emotionally significant moments for me on the trip, but this was one of them for me, because here was this woman who was about to ride her bicycle alone into Iran. And I asked her, where are you going to stay tonight? And she didn't know. She was just going to find a place to stay. And she and I laughed because we both had learned that the universe will provide when you need something. And if you need a place to stay, the universe is going to provide a place to stay. You will find a place to stay. It doesn't matter where you are. But still, even though you know that, and even though that history shows you day after day after day that you'll find a place to stay, something will materialize when you need it, it's still very stressful while you're waiting for it to do so. It's still very stressful to be beginning your walk or your bike ride or whatever for the day and to not know where you're going to sleep that night. So she and I, had a shared kindred spirits sort of moment. And that was another one of my favorite moments from the trip. So there were many things that happened on Saturday, and I don't know how to tell the stories yet about those things, but that's kind of one that I sort of do. But I'm very, very glad that the walk is over. And I, in the future, would like to walk across Iran, but not right now. I'm just very happy right now to wake up in the morning and not have to walk. There are other things that I have to do, but I'm very happy that walking is not one of them. And do we have some time? How are we doing for time?
We don't have any evaluators, just one, so we can take 10 minutes for question and answers.
Okay, 10 minutes for question and answers. So, does anybody have any questions?
Lots of them.
Yeah, okay. So let's start with the first one.
So, it's an amazing story. Thank you very much for sharing it. But just, you mentioned the end of the story. I think we all like to hear the beginning of the story. Like, what made you start to walk in the first place?
What made me start to walk in the first place?
Yeah. Like, back August, probably.
Okay. There are many, many things. Maybe there are some people out there who, take on something big and they have one focused reason that they do it, but that was not me. For me, there are a gazillion reasons. The one that started it all for me was that I have a friend of mine in Seattle. He and his wife have a son, and I lived in Seattle. I know George from when we were in high school, and so when I was back in Seattle, I would go, play roughhousing with this kid. And one day, we were just out playing. We were roughhousing, and I thought, I love this kid, and I need to do something big for him. So that was what started it. Was I need to do something big for this kid. And what I can do, one of the things I can do, I can walk across the country. And I can write a book too. So I'll when I do that, I'll dedicate it to him. So that was what got me started. Another thing that got me started was I lived in Istanbul before I went back to the U.S. So I lived in Istanbul from 2003 to 2009. And then when I went back to the U.S., I would tell stories about life in Turkey, and people would ask me what Turkey was like. And I found myself telling these same stories over and over, and one of the common refrains that I heard from people was, oh, wow, it's amazing that the stories that you tell are all these great fun stories, and we think that this is a dangerous part of the world. You know, we're kind of afraid of this part of the world. And I think that that is completely ridiculous. And when people are afraid, they make bad decisions, and they do really bad things. You know, they hurt other people, they hurt themselves. They do a lot of bad things. And so I wanted to do something that would show that this was not a place to be afraid of. I figured walking solo across the country and just putting yourself at the mercy of the people that you meet was a good way to do that. Other questions?
I have one actually. This lady that you met was cycling. When you spoke with her, did you share your experience, and did you get a sense of how much harder or easier it was for a woman rather than a man to find somewhere to stay or food, or was it the same?
We didn't talk for very much about that. So maybe she has a whole lot to say about it, but I don't know. The impression that I got from our chat, though, was that it's not nearly as big a challenge as she thought beforehand, or not nearly as big a challenge as other people thought it was. And she was actually amazingly matter-of-fact about the ability to ride across the country as a solo female, the ability to find places to stay. Some of the stories that I heard her tell, it sounded like she had an easier time than I did. So I don't know in great detail, but in general, it sounded like she was not nearly as impressed by it as others might be. Yes?
Actually, I'm wondering, did you make a route plan or did you just walk spontaneously?
Did I make a route plan?
Yeah.
Or did I just walk spontaneously? I made a route plan. For other people who approached other things different, or these things differently, maybe it would be unnecessary, but I love to plan stuff, so I had the entire route mapped out down to like the 5-kilometer segment. So I often knew the names of villages that were coming up, as well as the local villagers did. If somebody said that village XYZ is 4 kilometers away, and I knew that, I would know that it was 3 kilometers away, and even though I had never been there before. Yes, I had a route, and I had it really well planned. But that's just because that's my personality. You could do the same thing and just not plan it at all. Yes, I.
Yeah, Matt. So we kind of have had you here at Toastmasters, almost like in the middle of your walk, and now it's finished.
Yes.
I remember my questions. Now the challenge is over for you, and I am sure the trip you had was not only a trip by your walk, but it was also a trip to your mind, to your past, maybe to your future. Did you see the change yourself, before the trip and after the trip?
So I didn't ask, did I see a change in
On yourself? Yeah.
myself before versus after the trip?
Yeah. Or did you have a time to think about it? Actually, maybe it's too fresh. Maybe a few months later you will recognize. But initially, do you feel something that you changed in some way?
Yes. I feel that things have changed. I don't know what they are. I just feel like there's this big thing that I haven't processed yet, and I will at some point. One of the things that has changed is I'm still my old self. There are things that still make me really nervous, and they made me nervous before the trip. They still make me nervous now. But I just recently have this experience of being very nervous on an hourly basis, and then an hour later finding that things were just going to take care of themselves. And I kind of use that. I kind of use that same I'm still using that lesson. Things that make me, like for example, I know what I'll be doing for the next half year. I have a couple books to write. I will be here in Istanbul. I'll do some freelance English teaching or something, anything to put money in my pockets. After that, I'm not quite sure what's going to happen. But and that makes me nervous, because by nature that makes me nervous. But I know that
Everything is, yeah.
things are going to take care of themselves, and I have more of a sense or more faith in that than I did before.
Very good question.
Yes,
sir.
Thank you for the story, by the way, and nice memories to share. What I want to ask, as I can understand, it's a huge, there are a lot of stories that you have right now. We just had a little bit of it. So, did you make any kind of a, it can be a blog or it can be a website that we can just see the details?
yes,
So that we can just see which route you follow,
yes,
what kind of other things you faced, and the challenges
yes.
you faced. So we can just have a detailed understanding about what the adventure just gives to you.
Okay, yes. The website that I was using to document the trip is called heathenpilgrim.com. Heathen, H-E-A-T-H-E-N, Pilgrim, P-I-L-G-R-I-M.com. And so I, every time I took a photo, sometimes I wrote short blog posts and stories. I would upload those to the website. There's a page on there that shows the route. There's stuff like that. So yeah, there's the trip was documented from the beginning on that website.
But as I can understand, you didn't use any GPS or anything, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Just a road map.
Just
a manual map that you were following, or just.
I mean, the map. Most of the map was up here. And my map needs were very simple because, I was not out in the mountains where it's like, which way is north? I was, okay, here's Denizli, follow the road signs to Konya now.
Yeah.
It was pretty simple. I think during the entire 7 months, I only got lost one time, and that was for about 2 hours in Konya. And I was wandering around in Konya. I was walking east when I meant to go southeast. It was no big deal. A couple hours later, I was back en route. So my map needs, my GPS needs were very simple.
Yeah.
I'm in Denizli, walk towards Konya now. And do that for 6 months, and so my needs were pretty simple in that department. Yeah. Yes?
Actually, I'm a little bit shy about asking this question because last time I was here, it was last time that you were here, and I don't remember if you remember, I don't know if you remember my question last time.
About the shoes?
One of them is shoes and one of them is the other issue,
And I passed my midlife crisis. Those are the two questions. I won't forget those questions, by the way.
Are you over it?
I'll start like I did last time. I'll start with the shoes because that's the simpler thing. As you'll notice, I'm not wearing my boots now.
I can see.
Yeah. I have those boots.
Do they exist?
They exist. They're here in Istanbul. They came back to Istanbul with me. I am not wearing those boots because I wore that same pair of boots for 7 months, and that pair of boots smells pretty bad. It's kind of broken down. I have a pair of boots. I brought 2 pairs of boots. They're the Merrells. I brought 2 pairs of boots with me to Turkey. I figured the walk I would burn through 2.5 pairs of boots. I ended up just using 1 pair of boots. So those Merrells lasted for a long time. And yes, they are here in Istanbul with me, but I'm not wearing them. The other question, are you done with the midlife crisis now? If I remember correctly, that was the question, right?
Yeah, are you over it? You know what I mean.
Yeah. Yes, that's the short one. The slightly longer answer, the 1 minute answer, is For those of you who don't know, so 2 years ago, my wife and I split up, and that was my wife and I split up, and I was not happy with my job, which at the time was okay because my wife was going to come to the U.S. with me, and the job was just a means to an end. But then when the end was gone, then I was a recently divorced man with a job that he didn't like, and so that's when I looked at Prior and said I want to do something big for this kid. It was because there wasn't a whole lot of other big stuff happening in my life at that time, and I kind of knocked that one out, by doing something big. And so I've had in terms of is the midlife crisis over yet? I've had a couple years now to process, the divorce, and I've also done something big so that it's kind of, blotted out the oh my God, what's my life amounting to thing. And one thing that helped me a lot on this trip, or one thing that helped me a lot to do that, was that on this trip, it was a very standard thing for me to ask people's names, and after a while, some people do a big project like walking across the country or something like that for some big amorphous reason like world peace or something. But I was just doing it for a very specific reason. I want to do something for this kid. And by the way, here's some people, and if I get to know them a little bit, then we'll make an impact on each other's lives. And through half a year of repeating that many times each day over and over, I got to do something that meant a lot to me in a way that my previous job, which was making widgets in China and bringing them into the U.S., was not. That was more than a minute. So, but the one word answer is yes. Yes. All right. So, how are we doing for time?
Yes.
We're getting finished now.
Okay.